Paul actually brought a couple of the members of the council down to Acapulco, the last community summit we had, and we got a presentation on kind of the struggle that Cheran went through. And let me tell you, these people are incredibly inspiring in the kind of the hardship that they endured. But man, I'm telling you, they stuck together as a community, and it really is an inspiration to see how people can, you know, come together and work together and endure, you know, a great deal of hardship, and they have done it. And that alone is something awesome. But also the way that they govern, you want to just talk a little bit about that? Because one of the things that I think is really unique is that they don't actually write down the rules. They just kind of verbally agree on them. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting. Just back to the whole movement. It's very interesting. The other day, I managed to sneak my way into getting the Wi-Fi password for the central communal government house, so I could use Wi-Fi. And their Wi-Fi name, the name of their Wi-Fi service over at the government building is Ni un paso atrás. As soon as I read it, and they told me, "Hey, just look for Ni un paso atrás," and I just laughed. I had to laugh. And everything's just so inspiring here. Ni un paso atrás in Spanish means never, not one step backwards. we're never going back to having state police. We're never going back to having politicians in our town. So they're always reminding themselves that they're never going back to the old ways. They're always going to have an autonomous, basically self-rule. And it's run by fogatas, which they have in each. There's 4 barrios, and each barrio has up to 40 bonfires, you could say. And whenever decisions need to be made, anyone who's interested in an issue will come to one of these bonfires, and there's a representative of each fogata who's called the coordinator of the fogata, and that coordinator then takes the information of that group of people, which could be 5 people, it could be 20, depends who's interested and who turns up, and they take that back to the communal government, which is elected every 3 years. But you know, they've got no bodyguards, they've got no police protecting them. If anyone in the communal government, which is I believe 12 people, men and women, if anyone, you know, doesn't do what they're meant to do and what the people in the fogata or the bonfires decide and agree on, then they're going to have hell to pay. So it's a very much self-regulating system, and it just goes off their customs and practices. With a lot of people really interested in new ideas, so they're very interested in us and the anarchist movement, which is really lovely to see that they actually appreciate us coming here and sharing. So anyone who wants to come and visit and learn about this town and share something or contribute, they're very open to hearing about our ways as well. They're not just stuck in their own customs. That's a little bit of a summary.
Yeah, I think you know, just a couple other things I'll comment on, and we can. And honestly, I want to get back to Colin, because I want to talk a little bit about how his shop city integrates into, you know, what Presearch is going to deliver in regard to the distributed search engine. But you know, a couple things is, you know, those bonfires you talk about, these are direct democracy type of situations where the people actually like stand in front of the candidate that they want to represent them. And so like everybody knows who is actually supporting who in the community. There is no kind of you know, what's the
secret ballot.
I'm looking for? Yeah, there's no secret ballot.
Yeah. And it's totally transparent. No one can kind of rig the ballots or have an electronic system that can also be hacked into or rigged, because you're lining up behind the person and they just do a head count.
Yeah.
And you can't be re-elected the next year, so it's always someone new, so no one can become entrenched as like a dictator, you know. And they're only there to just facilitate the basic functions, you know. They're not there to make edicts and top down kind of dictating. They really are just there as a service to the community. They're not. No one looks at them as leaders, as in they're superior to anybody or have more power. They definitely have no power. Yeah, the bonfires have the power. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know the idea of like not writing stuff down is essentially kind of this idea, you know, is really going back to the basics of natural law, that like when you know, like people can see when they've been harmed, and so you need, you know, like the real natural law is effectively identifying people that like you have to have a victim, number one, you know, and so like a lot of those kind of rules
That's right.
are essentially pretty much straightforward and you know, things that people would consider common sense. And so by keeping the rules in a sense, you know, unwritten, keeps it fairly simple.
Simple, exactly. And often simple is the most profound and the smartest way to go, rather than confusing everyone. Yep.
Yeah, so that's something that I think we could probably learn from the community in Cheran. Is
well, no, that's the thing. That's the most effective governance. Is you don't overcomplicate it. Just make it goddamn simple. Like what you just described is just probably how humans have functioned for, you know, a million years. For Christ's sake, we don't need a replication of the European Union on Ethereum. Like just, you know, replicate what works, which is probably a bunch of grandmas just getting along. So yeah, I mean, I totally get it. So
yeah.
I'm digging it.
And you've got children getting on motorbikes, or especially on the quadrimotos, because some of them probably too small to even ride a motorbike. You know, and there's no one actually policing like driver's licenses or reg. The rego plates are often just stickers, or protest stickers, or they got one number plate from a different part of one state of the US on the front, a different number plate on the back, or no number plate. But no, there's nothing to do with like all of that sort of stuff with regulation and driver's licenses and car registrations. Once you leave Cheran, there's a little more of that. But a lot of my friends don't have a current driver's license, and then the police in the state will give them trouble. I've been in the car when the police gave them some trouble, and then he mentioned he's from Cheran, and then they just said, he just dropped gave him back his license and let him go, which was lovely. Yeah, even outside of Cheran, there's a respect for the people from this town. Yeah.
All right, let me get back to Colin. Colin, you mind? Okay, there you go. Talking a little bit about how you know, like creating the situation where the local community is kind of creating the information and stuff, and being responsible for the information that they create and the internet presence that they have. And I think this is another thing that really appeals to, could potentially appeal to Cheran as well as to Acapulco, is like the local community being responsible for the internet presence on the global internet.
Cool, awesome, and yeah, this is such an inspiring talk that we're having. I mean, what is going on in Cheran is pretty groundbreaking. I mean, it shouldn't be, because this is like, return to, you know, what's natural and you know, the way that things should be. And it's you know, it's sad that we've gotten so far away from that this is inspiring, but it is inspiring and exciting that you guys are a part of that, and that there's an opportunity for more of us to become a part of what's happening there, as well as what's happening in Acapulco. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to have just that case study, that pilot project, that model that can then be documented and replicated, you know, in whole or in part across smaller communities across the world. So great hearing about what's happening there. Just very briefly, Michael, just on the security thing, Guardian Circle, really interesting app. It's kind of a decentralized, you know, police force type model. So incentivizing people in the community to you know, help to you know, provide safety for people as required. Again, some of this stuff, I mean, I think it's going to happen on a more natural level without software. And same with really Shop City. I mean, word of mouth is still the most powerful mechanism for business owners to connect with customers. But you know, there is a certain point where you have these kind of, you know, either niche offerings or a community.
Oficina. No tienes la llave por ahí.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Or you know, you've got communities that are a little bit on the larger side. I mean, Acapulco in particular, but really any size community. You know, people often think that they know what's happening in a community. They think that they know what's being offered, what's available. But what we've seen, you know, even in really small communities, like single digit thousands of people, is that, man, there's so much that's going on out there. Services that are offered, products that are offered, you know, different events going on. And if you don't have kind of this central repository where you can, you know, both upload and discover this information, a lot of the time people will end up defaulting to the brands that they know. And you know, in North America in particular, it's become, you know, big box stores, and now, you know, globally it's become Amazon. And people are turning to these resources that create these you know, as Kent said, you know, leakages within the local economy. It's, you know, funds that could be spent locally that could then benefit from having a local multiplier effect, and you know, could possibly provide the revenue that's kind of the make or break for a service or a product to be viable in a community. And so it's about trying to, you know, harmonize that information, make it discoverable, make it searchable, and again, to go back to marketing, making sure that the people in the community know that this resource is available. You know, we unfortunately live in this, you know, world where Google kind of controls the information for just about everybody's, you know, questions. It's, you know, 92+% of people in the US are using Google to find what they're looking for. So, you know, it's kind of a benefit and a curse. Right now, we're trying to basically turn it into a benefit and ensure that as we're building out these local brands and we're trying to drive direct usage, that we are leveraging Google to the fullest. And so ensuring that all the content is search engine optimized and indexable and you know, likely to rank well on Google. You know, definitely, you know, it's kind of a stopgap measure, and it's not something that you want to be super dependent on. But as you're in the early and you're still building in a format that can be captured and utilized by Google, and then, you know, serve to the people that are using that platform to find what they're looking for. So it's you know, about how do we kind of build this two-sided marketplace. You're you know, trying to onboard the businesses, you're trying to onboard their content, you're, you know, training and you know, promoting out into the community these ambassadors who will you know, help businesses build out profile pages and get their inventory listed into a system, and you know, be strategic about that. You know, not everything needs to go online. It's you know, there are certain things that are really high value where you can stop, you know, significant leakage within an economy, and where there are you know, offerings that are not intuitive, so that people you know, don't necessarily know where to find it, and it's something that you know, you can provide value to people through by connecting them with, you know, just kind of interesting resources. And then, you know, on the consumer side, it's how do you build usage? How do you you know, build a brand? How do you monetize or you know, create that financial sustainability for the project? But yeah, that's, you know, what we've kind of been working on for almost 20 years. And it is, I think, one of the first things, if you know, we're looking at launching, you know, newer communities, or you know, trying to you know, redistribute or retake kind of control and power that can be, you know, distributed on a more natural, more equitable level. You know, commerce and trade really is kind of the heart of everything. And if you can have some type of you know, model that can enable you to really participate in that equation, it can facilitate the funding for a whole bunch of other, you know, socially oriented or you know, more goodwill oriented projects. And so yeah, it would be really interesting to see what could be done in Cheran. In Acapulco, as I mentioned to Michael, we have shopacapulco.com. We've owned that for probably 15 years. We were also friends with the guy, Michael Castello, that owns acapulco.com as well. So there's just some really interesting kind of branding opportunities that you know, will enable us to build out this authoritative local information hub that can then be utilized as a springboard for a whole bunch of different facets to, you know, building a free, resilient local economy.
You know, one of the things that I have noticed here, you know, in regard to kind of the idea of the Googles and the big massive multinationals and stuff, is they're turning people into consumers, and consumers are a lot easier to con. And when you go back to a local community, you turn people back into producers, and producers are people that can't be conned because they know that they have expertise in whatever it is they're producing. So if it's a mechanic, you know, or an auto repair guy or something like that, he's not necessarily just a consumer. He knows how the system works. He sees how, you know, how things are maintained and how things last. And so he's the expert. He's the local guy that can tell you this product works and that product is going to screw you, you know. And so, like, when you relocalize your economy, you end up with a lot more producers, and a lot more producers that you network with, that ends up giving you a great deal more value, and more than likely a lot more local value and locally sourced value, so that you know, you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it's so awesome that you brought that up, Michael. And that's, you know, totally the case. And you know, I definitely, I think that is unfortunately what's being happened is, or what's happening is this turning of people into consumers and separating them from the value that they create. And that's one of the interesting things, you know, with kind of this model, and you know, starting basically with the merchants, with the producers, because every producer is also a consumer. And so a lot of people, when we talk about, you know, this model, they say, oh yeah, but how are you going to get the consumers and whatever? It's like, man, the producers are also consumers. And so first thing is try to organize the producers, and then help the producers support other producers, and try to create that, you know, reciprocal economy. And then you can start branching out to the consumers, which, you know, ultimately I think and hope that model will go away, where, you know, we don't have so many parasites that are leeching off those who are truly producing value. But you know, it's interesting that if you know, flip that model, and you're not trying to reach consumers, you're trying to reach producers, and you know, by default, every producer is also a consumer. It gives you that kind of core that you can draw on, leverage, as you said, you know, introduce to each other, network, make it so that the sum is greater than the value of the parts. And yeah, it's a huge opportunity. I mean, the producers have been marginalized by most systems. The producers are the ones who are feeding, you know, unfortunately, these parasites in many respects. And you know, I think we'll have lots more conversations about, you know, local food and local food production. But if you think about it, that's kind of the heart of everything, and they've been, you know, the most marginalized in this, you know, factory farm based society, at least in North America. And you know, I think there's just this massive opportunity to start to you know, shift our focus and try to, you know, bring about those who are influencers within these local communities to this kind of vision of a different future. And in doing so, you know, make it cool to be involved in these types of projects, and make it so that local matters and that there is this sense of pride. And then that really ties into, you know, the individual identity, the stories that we're all telling ourselves and the world about who we are. And if we can make those stories you know, more important and louder, then I think, yeah, it's going to enable us to just continue to attract the talent and the human capital that's needed to solve some of these problems, and to have the willpower to make these hard decisions. As Paul mentioned, you know, just the Wi-Fi SSID. I mean, sometimes it's these little things that it's you know, you need those reminders of why you're doing things and why this matters. And the more people that we can get together who think this way and who care about these things, the more that we can reinforce each other and give each other that you know, courage to stand up to some of the injustices that we're currently rolling over to.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, another thing that you know, in regard to the communication is, and I think it actually functions both in Cheran as well as in Acapulco, because of the geography. One of the things that Acapulco offers is this idea of the line of sight type of internet provider. You know, where you can create just a single point that provides internet, and then everybody can have like a little dish. Like we've got that here at my house, and for our whole neighborhood is actually on this type of a system. But what that could do for the community is we could actually create a intranet within the city, that then effectively we could create things like our own local YouTube, and you know, create like our own you know, media and you know, figures, which is the exact opposite of what's going on with YouTube. You know, they're kind of washing out all the little guys,
Right.
because they don't have this national or international appeal. But for locals, you know, if you could get somebody that's, you know, maybe a skateboarder or something like that, that's got his own YouTube channel in Acapulco, but he does a, you know, weekly or a daily skateboard report or something like that, or surf report or something, and it's broadcast on our intranet that's accessible through the free Wi-Fi. That's you know, we could create so many personalities and so many experts on so many different areas that effectively could be accessed only through our own little community, that you know, that generates all kinds of interest and you know, and certainly economy behind it.
I wanted to talk about this for a second because it's kind of an interesting segue. I did run a nonprofit for skateboarders, and then based on the work that we did, I got asked to sit on the board of the Tony Hawk Foundation for 2 years, which is an example of a super high functioning nonprofit. It's like a multi-million-dollar nonprofit, right? And then from that, you know, worked with the Mia Hamm and the Keith, or the Lance Armstrong Foundation. And so it was really fascinating. And then from that, I actually got to do strategic political advocacy on behalf of the skateboard industry proper. And the contribution was, if we could get free skateboard facilities, it actually increased the sales of materials for the market, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, it's interesting because people have said, if you have such substantial contacts into the skateboard industry, why have you never worked for it? And it's because it's a fashion business. And an overwhelming majority of the discussions they have has to do with how to move their manufacturing facility closer and closer to the border of North Korea so they can save a few pennies. It's disgusting, by the way. So anyway, it gave me a lot of really interesting insight into one of the things, I'm talking Quicksilver and OP and all those huge brands. It was fascinating. Their biggest challenge isn't each other in terms of branding. Their biggest challenge is the ma and pop skateboard shop that happens to share a counter with a pharmacy. Like, there was a skateboard shop in Portland called Cal's Pharmacy, and it's because the family there had a kid that skated, and he started selling skateboards over the counter in the pharmacy. And the brand equity of the community is always more important, it's stronger than it is for the national brand every single time. It's fascinating, actually. They and it just killed these guys, right? Because they spent millions of dollars on branding, and they just couldn't beat these small little places. And so I was fascinated by that, and I've seen that phenomena happen over and over again. And so I'm saying that I have a strong belief that the work that Colin's doing and some of the vision you're talking about, Michael, is if you have a Cheran version of YouTube, I'm pretty sure that the local brand equity would be more than the YouTube equity, provided the content is there for him. And it doesn't mean that it has to be all the content. It's just got to be enough. You know what I mean? I think Colin probably understands what I'm saying. You gotta have enough there. But what you can do, I think, creatively, is generate that brand equity within the culture, the subculture. And if you do it right, you can't shut it down. That's the really amazing thing about it, is that I've seen this play out in multiple places where the shop itself might shut down, but the brand continues for years after that, because it's a sense of belonging and ownership that's local. It's us, right? Us, and not some big. It's not Quicksilver or whatever. Related aside, I did meet a guy who was trying to work on an architecture which would provide communities a broadcast capability over a mesh network. And his idea behind that is, what he was saying is that with the introduction of 5G, there's going to be a more centralized suppression of any dissenting views. And so he came up with an architecture that enables communities to have their own, basically, broadcast ability. I thought it had great promise. My only criticism is that he's so obsessed with the deep state, he doesn't appear to be doing anything about his vision, which annoys me to no end. So, maybe if there's somebody else that's actually working on it, that would be kick-ass. But I think there's something there. I actually think that there's room for that. I think that people would seize it if they had the ability of having their own YouTube or their own or something. Jesus, I think they would really be into it. So yeah, that's my monologue.
Yeah, well, that goes along with basically every business person that's in that particular community has the potential to create a weekly or a monthly blog or vlog that could be access to the community that provides more information on their particular expertise within the community. And so just like that could even be a service. That could be someone that, like, it's not like a YouTube where you actually create the video yourself. It could be something that there's a video production business within that goes out to the other businesses and produces the video about that particular business. And so this is one of the things that like creating the local version of the internet presence of the community. We start working together to like bring all the different things and all the different aspects of the community to that portal that then does go, that does present the community access to the rest of the global internet.
Mm-hmm.
And for Acapulco, that's really unique because that's the business that the primary business they're in is tourism, and so that also is a I think a gold mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a customer who's doing a deployment in Colombia, and they talk about pods. And each pod is essentially a DVBN, distributed virtual, borderless nation, I guess. Yeah, and so what it really is a repository of knowledge, and what we've been developing is what they call categories, which is dramatically understated. They have one of them is essentially it's like knowledge, a compilation of knowledge. So and Michael and I have talked about this. Given our backgrounds, like I know how to build a pole barn. It wouldn't be very pretty, but it would work, right? So if somebody wanted me to author how to actually do it, I could knock that out. I could write it up. And likewise, there's a few things I know. I know how to work on cars, and I know how to know a little bit about electrical, just enough to be dangerous. So, this is knowledge, and that knowledge is actually really valuable. It's actually really valuable to a community. This is what I like about introducing something that doesn't rely upon buying and selling, because I think that knowledge itself is actually really important. This is what I like about what Joe was talking about. The feather thing is goddamn genius to me, because think about, like, imagine that within the community, people might have that knowledge and they know that it's valuable, but they're trying to, there's an attempt to condition them towards monetizing it, which is just an assumption that it's, I don't know, it's a perversion to me. But imagine that if you had knowledge that would be of value and you could make it available to others and actually get clout for that, that's kick ass, right? And I don't think we're talking utopia here. I actually think about what we're really talking about is barter. You know what I mean? Like, if I do this for you, you do this for me, and then I get a feather for recognition. We can totally do that. That's not rocket science, but that's kick ass, right? Yeah, no, I love it.
You're getting the idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hear me?
Yeah, no. Yeah, plus the feather metaphor is great, because when I find a feather, I feel like it's a gift from the universe. So I'm a big crow guy, so my wife found a crow tail feather, and I was like, whoa! I spent years following crows around. I've never found one of them. So, yeah, the feather metaphor works for me.
It's the ability of us to contribute what we feel is our highest contribution value. Shouldn't be based on how much fiat we can trade with one another. Like, by contributing our highest value to someone and them reflecting it back with a kind of a receipt that says, yes, I've received something of great value, and you may take this receipt and tokenize it, and that becomes another transaction that gets added onto the next block of a blockchain. So you start creating a blockchain of value, and so yeah, that's been something that's bothered me for years. Is why can't we just express gratitude to someone and have that gratitude be monetized somehow?
No, I mean, I'm resonating on this. So I was raised in a family business, and I have an uncommon intuition for how to make money. But personally, I don't give a shit about money. So it creates an interesting dynamic. I've made other people a lot of money, and what I get in return is they get appreciation. They have appreciation that I've helped make them successful, and I get to cash that in later on. It creates an interesting influence network, right? And
Yes.
it's social clout. And so I have a pretty impressive professional resume because I've helped make a lot of people successful. But what's beyond that, what transcends that, is how many other people who don't end up showing up on LinkedIn, just those that I've provided some insight to, and they dig it, man. It also helps make them a hero. You know what I mean? So Michael had talked about time banking. I goddamn love the concept. I don't know if he's talked about it. Do you want to talk about it, Michael? Because I think it's goddamn brilliant. Is this idea that, because that's what I want to do with my life, right? Like, I want to go out there and I want to say, I want to act as an entrepreneur. I might not be right every single time, but I want to give it a shot. I want to come up with ideas on how to make this self-sustainable in a way that transcends the ordinary monetary structures, right? So anyway.
Yeah, well, I think, what we're talking about is just going beyond, what is considered legal tender, and having different forms of exchange. So maybe time is one of them. Maybe, tokens are another. Maybe there's a bunch of different things, and maybe there's just barter. There's if we create the circumstance that we have, like, the ability for people to do things in different ways and make them aware of it, more than likely they'll start to really start to recognize that each person has value, and it comes in many different forms. It's not just the damn money, and that's, I think, the biggest thing that I really think that this is another positive that we have with, the examples of Cheran and Acapulco, because I really think that Mexico is one of the few countries in the world that still has an understanding of the values that are important, that are other things than money. You know, the family in Mexico is certainly one of the things that they still have a recognition of value, you know, and then they also recognize that, like, you know, that word of mouth, and that, like, the family members, you know, when you ask somebody something here, you know, how to do something, if they don't know it, they say, oh, well, I got a cousin that can do that, or something like that, you know. And so that those are the kind of recognition of value in other people that they still have an attachment to, whereas modern culture has completely lost that. You know, if they can't buy it on Amazon, or if they can't look it up on the internet, they don't know it's possible. All right, I'm gonna try and give Kyron another chance to introduce himself. Let's see if we can.
You all hear
Kyron, are
me?
you there?
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, good. I'm Kyron Pearson. I might have met a couple of you in Acapulco the last couple years. I've been. I didn't go to the one last year, but I've been to 3, I believe, so far. But anyway, you know, a little bit about me, my background. I'm originally from Gary, Indiana. Actually, like Michael, we're actually from the same hometown. It was interesting. One in Anarchapulco, we were at Michael's house, and there were like 10 people from Gary, Indiana, and we didn't know. We just ended up figuring out that we were all from Gary, Indiana. It's an interesting place. I think a lot of people ended up there because they were anarchic in their understanding of the world and life in general. And or Gary just makes you an anarchist. It might be something in the water from Lake Michigan. But my background is my people ended up in Gary from the South. Southern blacks escaping basically debt bondage of sharecropping, and ended up making Gary 90% black city. So like, I grew up where you had all of these Southern blacks who had all of this great knowledge about farming, and there would be backyard gardens that were huge, that were, you know, amazing, that produced a lot of food, and that was just sort of the standard. Everybody had that in their backyard, and they talked about it, you know, incessantly with each other. How your tomatoes doing? How your collards doing? How's your corn, etc. And so this was a common theme growing up, and you know, there was a lot of food being produced in that context. And so, you know, of course, I moved to Boston, went to college, um, and started working, and was working really hard, a lot of hours, like 80 plus hours a week, which is insane. I thought, you know, I was young, I could do it. Hurt my back really bad from not resting, not eating well, and trying to overexert myself and stay healthy. And it ended up giving me a really bad back injury. And so I ended up on bed rest. I had a condition called drop foot, where I couldn't walk on my heel on my right leg. I was in excruciating pain for 9 months, and I almost killed myself a couple of times because I was in that much pain. I didn't see an end to it. And so, you know, outside of that, I was like, you know, I really have to start healing my body. And I started juicing, you know, vegetables. And I was spending a lot of money, even though I didn't have much money coming in on food. And so, you know, of course, my brain gets to going. Like, you know, I know how to farm. I grew up around people who were farmers. I know how to grow food. It ain't rocket surgery. It's difficult, but it ain't hard. And I thought about, you know, buying land and you know, farming. And then, of course, when you think about buying land, you need a house. So, you know, I didn't have a lot of money, and explore different alternative home building techniques like earthships. I don't know if everybody here is familiar with earthships, but there are houses built out of tires, bottles, and cans. And you fill the tires with earth, and you ram the earth in with a sledgehammer, and that essentially creates a steel belted radial brick. These bricks, of course, create structure and thermal mass. So the house is oriented south, and it collects all the solar gain. And you know, you don't need a furnace, you don't need an air conditioner because it's burned as well. So you tap into the Earth's, you know, natural geothermal, and you end up, you know, not having to spend a lot of money on heating and cooling your house, and that's less money that you need to make overall. So then that's less time you have to work and more time that you can garden. Of course, most cities do not allow you to build such structures because of zoning. And I found out that there's all of these places where in the US that you could build. Can you all hear me still? All right, where you can build earthships. But the problem is that you don't really have sort of what the most valuable thing to all of us is, and that's each other at our disposal. So you know, that ended up eventually making me an anarchist or a voluntarist. And so because of that, that's how I ended up, you know, in this particular in this particular chat, and why I'm here now. And so I got to thinking about, you know, what it is that we can do where we are. And I've heard a lot of discussions during this conversation, during this conference, where people are you know, basically saying, hey, look, let's use the infrastructure that we already have. And, you know, yeah, it would be great and idyllic to be able to pack up and move everybody to one, you know, place and farm and build houses. But, you know, that sense of community really isn't very achievable, it seems like, in this context. So I've figured out for me that growing food where we are could help create a whole lot of security. I think when most people think of when, you know, shit hits the fan scenarios, their main concern is eating and food. They say that we are only 12 meals away from complete chaos, from people, you know, going house to house, cannibalizing each other, etc. I don't think it's 12 personally. I think some people are just gonna, you know, at about meal 4, just start, you know, doing whatever they need to do to eat, because they want to have a jump on everybody else who's you know, starving essentially, and be strong in that fight. So a way to mitigate that would be to produce a lot of food in the cities. You know, I look up and down the streets of every city that I'm in, and the government, of course, plants trees that aren't producing anything other than trees, leaves, etc. When these trees could easily be fruit trees or nut trees or medicine trees. And there are the beauty of the city too as well is that there are a lot of ornamental trees that are fruit producing, or they could be fruit producing varieties, but they just don't have those particular, you know, genes to produce fruit. But you can graft onto them actual fruit producing varieties. So where I've had the idea and would love to have some help with implementing is creating an app that combines the efforts that are happening in the city to create more food production, right? To have people that go out and graft fruit producing varieties on these ornamentals that geolocate where the ornamentals themselves are, to have arborists go out and identify trees in the city that are, you know, potential fruit producing varieties of ornamentals, and also geolocate and map out where actual already fruit producing varieties are, and then create a network of maybe youth to go out, harvest those fruit when they're ready, and package it to sell it to the people that live in the area, or to donate them to homeless shelters, etc. Or just use them for themselves, you know, to feed themselves. also have an interest in permaculture, which is sort of what Kent has talked about, believe it or not, in wanting to create systems that sort of allow value not to easily escape from a community. Now, permaculture is the idea that you want to keep, nutrients and water in your particular system, and you create all of these infrastructures that allow for water to not run off your land quickly. And by doing so, then you can create small ponds, and those small ponds are, high nutrient aggregators, and allow for you to ramp up production substantially. Um, I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if I should, or.
Oh, I have a lot to share on this. I just moved from Portland, Oregon to Austin, Texas, and I'm multi-generation Oregonian. So, my family, that's the farming and growing food, that's definitely their thing, because that's how they survived, right? That's the frontier. And as you probably know, that that region is an earthquake-prone area, right? And in fact, there's an overdue earthquake associated with the Cascadia subduction zone, and it happens historically about every 300 years, and it causes like a 90-meter tsunami, and it's devastating, right? Last one happened in 1700, so it's, a few years overdue. I don't know if you know this, you can go look at this. The USGS has stopped reporting earthquakes in Oregon. They did that a few months ago. And when people feel an earthquake, USGS is quick to say that it was an explosion at a quarry in an area where there's no quarry. And then, what my wife and I started seeing were city of Portland people having earthquake drills, but them not acknowledging it. And we were like, oh, dude, we got to get out of the city. So,
Wow.
And our house lost 80,000 in value in 1 year. That was interesting. These are the things that aren't really being reported in the media, right? But we were just there. We're like, dude, we got to get out of the city. It's geographically isolated, more or less. It's out there in the west, and you get a good earthquake, and the Cascadia earthquake they think is an 8 point something on the Richter scale. So it'll knock out the small number of freeways and railroads that are going into the area, and everything else will be disrupted. And as in a nice urban utopia of Portland, there's very few people who are doing anything but keeping just 1 to 2 meals in their house, and they expect that they're going to be able to get pho or whatever else. And so I did try to forge some collaborations with people that because actually you can grow. It's actually a good place. It's a favorable environment for growing fruits and vegetables and that sort of thing. But I found that I couldn't find anybody in the region at the time that wanted to actually put together the collaboration you're talking about, which just is a simple use case, is that we know that earthquakes happen. Dude, we're surrounded by volcanoes up there. In my memory, Mount St. Helens blew, and it filled a river that's 4 miles across, right? It was filled with the remnants of a blasted forest. I've seen this firsthand, right? And you know it, like cognitively, you just know it. There's lava everywhere. There's, the city itself has lava vents, that we call them hills there in town, but we know, that they're lava vents, and we know there's earthquakes, and we know that this is overdue. It's like a strange cognitive dissonance. Like, people know this, but everybody goes, well, but is it going to happen now or in 100 years, right? It seems like a fool's game to me, right? So, I actually got all these boxes here, and I think probably 8 of them are filled with food, and I actually end up bringing it to a region that doesn't have a lot of earthquakes, but anyway, what you're talking about makes a ton of sense, because for us, that's a fundamental use case. Like, we consider number one use case is, do you know where my children are and are they still alive? To us is like a fundamental number 1A, right? It's like a basic communication ability. Can somebody let me know that my loved ones are okay? And if they are, cool. If they're not, man, can I trade some aspirin for something? Because I need help, right? And that's like a fundamental thing. And so I do like this conversation about this, because this is an essential human survival thing. And I actually think that you're right. There are going to be people who are going to get savage, but I think there's probably an equal number, if not more, that are going to be very good, right? So I want to embrace that. I want to make that available. And here's the cool thing. I don't think we have to build a utopian solution to pull that off, because I think that spirit is already there, as Paul Kent has talked about. It's already happening, right? So, the momentum is on our side. Let's put it that way. We don't have to fight uphill on this one.
Yeah, I agree with you as far as, most people being good. I think that, there are some that, will try to exploit and use this opportunity to really do the savagery that they want to do. And I think that if there are people that are already in place that have the skill set to put those kind of people down, but also have the supplies to be able to prevent that, and have the networks to prevent that from happening, from people, you know, not going without and even considering it. I think that that is and will be a great asset to everyone. And you know, I think also in the interim, it also will function as a means to undermine any government that there is in the area, period, point blank. I mean, if you got a context where people aren't spending money going out, um, buying gas to put in their cars, funding the government, uh, to go to the grocery store to buy food, then you've just not only increased their food security, but you've also increased the amount of money that they then have to do other things that are more fruitful and for everyone as a whole, and to promulgate voluntarism, to promulgate these sort of ventures that we're talking about.
Let me just chime in. You know, certainly one of the things that you mentioned, Kyron, is you know, like collecting food, identifying trees and stuff that bear fruit. Acapulco is one of those places that there's like mango trees, and there's you know, all kinds of different tropical fruit trees that, you know, effectively, you know, coconuts are falling out of the sky, and they just, you know, roll down the street and stuff, and that's there's just so much of that potential there, that like if you could get like the local kids to identify where these things are and collect them up, and you know, potentially sell them, or even give them away, you know, there's a great deal of food here right off the bat that could be utilized to like create a little economy, and start these, you know, kids with this entrepreneurial idea, and also recognition of like the benefits that this place has. The other thing I want to mention is that, you know, I've been following economics for quite a while. You know, certainly when I got introduced to Ron Paul and the Mises Institute and that kind of thing, and so I, you know, I've been kind of watching this last bubble, and you know, the Western Australia right now is really kind of the cutting edge of where the bubble is popping. And so like there's a particular city outside of Perth, Australia, that used to be a boom town that's turned into, you know, kind of a nightmarish, you know, where like 40% of the houses are now you know, for sale, or they've lost like 40% of their value. You know, much of the jobs have left. The crime rate has gone through the roof. Drug rate has gone up, and you know, it reflects kind of a lot of the things that are wrong with the society, and what they've preyed on and encouraged, as far as, you know, creating people that are victims, that are consumers, that are you know, unable to help themselves. And so what happens is you get these communities that, like, you know, when everything is going great, everything is wonderful, but when everything starts to go to hell, people don't know what to do, and they just, you know, they either you know, go and get on drugs, and you know, with some of the drugs that they got these days, and certainly, you know, the medications and stuff like that, a lot of people get hooked on, you know, the opiates and stuff like that, and next thing you know, they're heroin addicts, and they're stealing to support their habit and stuff like that, and so the crime rate goes up and all that kind of stuff. But this is something that's going to be happening on the entire Western, you know, in the entire Western civilization, you know, because I mean, if you look at the GDP results here this past week, with I mean, the fraud that they're trying to present as the American economy, you know, the business investment is down, the exports are down, government spending is up, and that's really the only thing that's supporting the economy at the moment, is just they're just pumping in more and more debt, but that can't go on forever. And so there's going to be this bubble pop, and you know we've got the potential for, you know, and with the way that they're situating people where they've got everybody against everybody else, we've got a real powder keg in the Western world. And you know, this is one of the things that you know, that we certainly as a community of people need to be prepared, but we also need to have kind of like, you know, a couple different fallbacks. And so like being able to like educate each other on like what are things that are valuable is certainly something that allows us to be and feel more secure. You know, even if hell breaks loose in Boston, you know, you can know that, hey, well, I can always go to Cheran, or I can always go to Acapulco.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point, you know, you don't even have to look to Australia. I mean, our hometown, Gary, Indiana, is a case study in and of itself. You know, the steel industry went in the 80s, right when I was born, and Gary just went to hell. It became a shit show. House property. I mean, like my mom just sent me a house that she thinks I should buy for $5,000.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
I mean, Gary is what, you know, I think it would be better to start an anarchist community, voluntarist community in Gary than any other place in this country. It's an hour to O'Hare International Airport. The soil is amazing. It's like pure black soil. It's the blackest soil I've ever seen in the world, anywhere I've been. And it's just, you can grow anything, and there's no rocks in it at all whatsoever. It's just pure loam. You literally could you could just scoop out with your hand arm deep, like to your armpit. That's how rich the soil is there. And there's so much infrastructure that's already there that does not have to be built. And you know, if you combine that with the empty lots that are there, you could plant so much food. I mean, my neighbor down the street from where I live here in Boston has a blueberry bush that's just overgrown. I went in and pruned it, took a whole bunch of cuttings from it, and now I'm going to root them. And it's so easy to, you know, I watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos, and it's so easy to grow blueberries. I'm like, why aren't there blueberries in everyone's yard here? Like, how much food and nutrients could that produce for people? And we need those kind of phytonutrients that you know, blueberries are producing and giving to us. And so, like, you know, if you did something like that in a context like Gary, that already is a case study of what you're talking about, of places, you know, basically becoming shit shows, drug addiction, murder, break-ins, you know, just all types of criminal activity. I think that, you know, we could really, you know, use that as a great example of what to do. And
well, you know, I'll give you another example. You know, there more than, like in Wisconsin, more than half of the family dairy farms in Wisconsin have went bankrupt in the last couple of years. You know, and a great deal of it has to do with, you know, Trump basically creating those tariff situations where, you know, it screws up the circumstances for exporting, you know, the different dairy products and so forth. But what it is actually a consolidation. You know, the big companies are eating up all the little local, you know, mom and pop farm operations in Wisconsin and probably around the country. And so they're, you know, just like what YouTube is doing to the YouTubers, the dairy industry is consolidating, and it's, you know, it's destroying the livelihood of a whole bunch of mom and pop and you know, small farm type situations. That's not going to be good for people's, you know, food security in the future, because, you know, it's going to be even more corporatized in the future in the United States for sure, and potentially the rest of the you know, the Western world. But this is the model that just keeps happening over and over again. They keep taking away the ability for like the average person to be a producer and to have the knowledge of like how to actually raise blueberries, because it's, you know, it's all packaged and all put into their local grocery store, and they don't even know how food is created.
Well, so we have ran into this interesting thing is that, you know, our software platform keeps the money internal. It stops fiscal leakage, basically, which is a concept that I think you guys get, but I'm surprised at how many people don't. Like, you know, every time you go to the point of sale, let's say you were a retailer. My wife used to have a brick and mortar store. So every time you go to the retailer and at point of sale, you pay with your Visa card, that's usually about 2.3% per transaction plus 10 cents, which adds up, right? But, you know, if you're also selling on Pinterest, that's a pretty big chunk. And I mean, you pay to PayPal, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, and then of course there's taxes and all the other stuff. That fiscal leakage actually adds up. So if you can come up with a way to keep the money internal to the community, you stop the leakage, and it's surprising how much that adds up. And then I hit the wall. I realized people don't get it at all. People don't get it.